Welcome to the fastest stuff in town. Today we're going to Ketubot stuff Tes Vav. We are going to begin on the bottom of Yud Daled Amud Beis by the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us the following story. Rav Yosi, Masa B'Tinaikis. There was a story of this young girl. Shiardo L'Malos Maimei Ayin, and she went to fill up water, and unfortunately Venensa. So someone was ma'anis this young girl. Now the question was, what is the status of this man? Because we don't know who it was. So Rav Yochanan ben Nuri, so he says that Imrob Anshe Ir Masin LeKahuna. The majority of the people, or those who are able to marry into kahuna, Harzu Tinas LeKahuna. Then she is able to do so as well. So we see that we go Basar Rov. If we have Rov Ksherim Etzla, then we say that she's a kosher as well to be able to marry into kahuna. Now, this is a little bit difficult based on what we've learned before. Says the Gemara, Amalei Rebel Reb Nachman, Rav Yochanan ben Nuri di Omer Kaman. Who exactly is he holding like? Rabbi Gamliel, if he's saying like the leniency of Rabbi Gamliel, but Rabbi Gamliel holds that fil baroi psul nami machsher. Even if the majority of the people in that city are puzzle, even in that situation he's lenient. Why does he say it's only by Rav Ksherim, even by Rav Psulim? And Rabbi Yeshua, who's strict, and fil baroi ksherim nami puzzle. According to Rabbi Yeshua, it doesn't make any difference. Even if you have a majority of individuals that are kosher, that will not help. She will still be considered to be puzzle. So how do we understand this middle ground of the shita of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? So Amalei Hachi Amar Rabbi Yehuda Merav. This is what it's referring to, and we're going to end up saying that, as Rashi says, well, Oilim Rabbi Yeshua. That really he's generally strict. That when it comes to even one rov, one majority, even if that majority is rov ksherim, we're still going to say she's pastel kahuna. So the question is, so why in this case is it okay? So the Gemara says, we continue to test about Aleph, b'krana shel tzipora hayamaisa. It's referring to the wagons, the travelers in Tzipora. So if you look in Rashi, going back to Yudal Mabeis, Rashi says, the reason why he's leaning here is mishum de'ika trey ruby l'kashrus. If it was just one rov, that wouldn't be enough. But there's two majorities. And as we're going to explain later on in the reasoning, the difference between one rov and two. So Rashi explains on the top of Tes Vav Amud Aleph this notion of what does it mean when we're talking about these wagons. So Rashi says, Biyom HaShuk, in the days of the marketplace, Shetzios v'shayaros v'makam acher, that you have travelers that are coming from another location, Ba'yisham, they come here. So in this case, we actually have two rows. You have the row of the people that live in the city, and you also have the row of the people that are travelers from another city. So the fact that you have Rav Ksherim in both situations, that Trey Rubi will be enough to say that she will be Kashal Kahuna. Back in the Gemara, Rabbi Ami, Diam Rab Ami, V'hu Shahaisa Sia Shel B'nei Adam Ksherim, Oiveres Hashem. It has to be in a situation where the travelers, again, are also kosher. Okud Rabbi Yanai, Diam Rabbi Yanai, Nivelis B'krainais Kshera L'Kahuna. If the incident took place by B'karanais, by the wagons, therefore, or it's mashma actually on the wagon, then she's kosher Kahuna. Big kronos, what exactly does that mean? The accident had to have happened mamish on the top of a wagon. Ella, this means like this: Nivelos b'shas karanais kshel kahuna. It has to be during the time in which these wagons come through, as we said, at the time that people come biyom hashuk. So because people come to the marketplace on this particular day, so that's why you have a second row. However, in the situation where someone was pirish when separated, so the din is the child will be a shtuki, which we say is the situation where we don't know the status of the father is. And Rashi says, why? Because according to him, one rov is not enough. You need trey ruby. Okay, so let's look at question 4. So kaman ozl mastisen. E Rabbi Gamliel, a feel b'roib psul machsher. The Rabbi Yeshua, a feel b'roib ksherim poisel. So he says, really, he holds like the more stringent opinion that one row of kashrus is not enough. But however, in this situation, the reason why he's makel, even though he holds like Rabbi Yeshua, is mishum demasa hayvakona shel sipar the ika trey rubi l'kashrus achshra. Because again, there's these two rules. Okay, fine then. So that was question 4. Vait in the Gemara. So Kiha, Techiyos the Rabdim Yomer Zi Yomer Rab Chanina v'Yermel Asam say was Omer Zi Yomer Rab Chanina Hoychan Acharoi v'Ir, that we go after the majority of the people in the city. Ve'ein Hoychan Acharoi Sia. We don't go after the majority of the travelers. So the fact the Gemara Klapi Laya, where is that going? You would think it should be Pum Fakert. Hani Naidi v'Hani Kvi v'Kaimi. So these people are moving. And normally we're more lenient when we say when things are 90. We say Kol Parsh Meruba Parish. We go Basaroiv. However, when it's Kaviyah, we say Kol Kabuk Kamachsal Machsadam. So why would we say it that way? Elo, you're right. We do go after the majority of the city that are kosher, provided as long as you also have the Rov Tzia together with them, which creates the two robes. The majority of the city itself by itself is not enough. As well as we also don't hold of that robe by itself. You need both. So my timer. So what is the whole reasoning behind this stringency? You need two robes. Because we're geyser otu. So Rov ha'ir nami. So how about the majority of the city also? Called the parish meruba parish. Why we should say it's not even an issue, because if they're moving around and they came to her, then we say anyone who's separated from the majority, and the din is that if you have a robe kosher, that should be enough. She went to them. So that's the problem. Even though you're right, rove kasher should be sufficient in order to say shvish kashel kahuna, but the problem is that we would not say rove unless it's a case of pirish. But since if she came to them, that would fall into the category of kol kavu kemechsal mechsadami. You don't have a rove, even if according to the census there actually is a majority, but that halachically doesn't count as a rove. That's halachically as kavua. It's 50-50. So the Gemara wonders. This Mishnah is hard to understand. Umi be'inon trei rube. Is it really true you need two majorities of a sign? Yatesha chen v'yos. So you have these 10 stores that kul and meichros basa shchuta. They all have, it's a kosher butchery. All of them, all these 9 are kosher. However, achas mocheres basa in the veila. There's one store out of the 10 that is treif. So you end up taking meat from one of these 10 stores. For whatever reason, there's no simanim, so you have no idea where this meat came from. So sveiku aser, we say because we're in a situation of doubt, it's aser. Why? Because we apply the din of kol kavu kamachsal machsadami. So even though it's 9 against 1, we still say that's not good in order to be able to eat this meat. However, the nimsa halchachar, we know that if you find it, in other words, it was separated from those stores, it was in some other location, so when we apply kol parish merub parish. So l'chayra, that is a question, because l'chayra we see that you only need one robe. We don't find this notion of requiring 2 majorities. Maybe we're talking about a situation where the doors of the city literally are not locked. And therefore you could also include the majority of people outside of that city. Therefore maybe it is a second row. Now the Hom Rav Zer says Medina Neulois. He holds that doesn't make any difference. Even if the doors, so to speak, are locked, and therefore there's no possibility of including another city or anything outside of your city, so nonetheless this din still applies, which is mashma, that you don't need 2 robes. So why does our Mishnah say you need 2? So Gemara says, you're right. Really, 1 robe should be enough. So then why are we making such a deal that you need 2 robes by kahuna? So as we said before, mal osu b'yuchsin. When it comes to the dinim of kahuna, we go extra strict, and therefore we require 2 robes. Even though you're right, ikra din 1 robe should be sufficient. However, because we want to be able to have a malul for yuchsin, for kahuna, therefore we say only if she has 2 robes on her side, only then is she mutter to be able to marry a kohen. Gufa, getting back to what we said before. So we established this concept that, for example, if she would have gone to them, or if the meat was there, then we say it's 50-50. Bein l'kul, bein l'chumra. It doesn't make a difference if we're lenient or we're strict. In either situation, we say that din. So, in other words, you could say, again, when it comes to a situation where, again, you have 9 kosher stores and 1's not kosher, so you would think that should be good enough. 9 against 1. No, that's a chumrah. Then we say no. But we also say it l'kula. So Manoli, Reb Zerah, how does Reb Zerah know this din? If it's from the stores, so sveiko aser. So we said in that case we're not sure, so it's aser. Now hasal l'chumra. So that doesn't really seem to answer his other point. He says the notion of kol kavul kamechsal mechsadami is not only in the situation of a chumrah, but it's also lakula. So the question is, how does he see that we apply this instance also lakula? Ella mitisha svardim v'sheretz echa b'neihem. So let's say instead of the stores there are 10 different things. You have 9 svardeim, which then themselves are tahar, and then you have a sheretz, which of course is matama. So out of the 10, only one of the things is makabel tumah. So b'neihem, but noga be'echa mehem. Now you touch one of these 10, ve'en yodei be'ezehem noga. So you don't know which one you touched. So therefore, again, you would think that because there's 9 which are svardeim, so maybe you should be tahar. So no, sveiko tame. No, so hasam no chumrah. What do you mean? How is that answering the question of it being l'kula? This is also a chumrah. Ella metisha shratzim v'svardei acha b'neim. Say it the other way around. There was more shratzim, but there's only one svardeia. V'naga be'echa b'hem, you touch one. Ve'eno dei be'ezam and naga. So b'rshus hayachid sveiko tame. We learn out from the din of a saita that just as a woman secludes herself in a case, which is reshus yachid in a private area, so therefore it's a doubt. So we say sveiko tame. So too, that's the general rule that in the situation where this took place in a reshus yachid sveiko tame. However, here's the kula reshus harabim sveiko tahar. Even though there is a majority of shratzim, but since it was the Rishus Harabim, so therefore we say Sfeiko is Tahar, which therefore we see a situation of Lakula. How do we know that there is such a concept of this in the Torah? So because the Pasuk says, the Orabu of a Kamalov, that regarding him being ambushed. So this is regarding Misa or Golos. It says, it's only when you actually had kavana, you had intent to kill. Rashi says, however, if let's say you intended to kill one person, even though your intention was to kill, but it was to kill another individual, so then that's not considered to be the same din as a person who intentionally wished to kill the same person he actually accomplished to kill. It's referring to a situation where a person throws a rock into a mass group, says Rashi. Lego, a group where there are numerous people who are Canaanim, Yisraelim, some Jewish, some not Jewish. So that's what it's referring to. Rashi says, Avol Shnei Yisraelim. If you have 2 Yisraelim, Oimdim Neschav Hargzeh, the hisru boy, you're given hasra, don't kill. The kibul hasra, but nafal hakol al chaver, you hit someone else, chayiv. So actually, it's a machlokus. If a person intended to kill Yisrael X, he ended up killing Yisrael Y, and he was given hasra, so it's actually a machlokus whether or not this pasuk b'arbla v'kamlo is a miyut, or maybe it's not a miyut. And the miyut is instead a situation where you throw a rock into a group of people and you end up killing someone in the process. So hey chidami. So what is that situation? Be part if let's say there's more Canaanim, so if typically the Ruba Canaanim ninhu, then you should say because the majority of them are Canaanim, and therefore that's the reason why you're not going to be chayiv. Ella. Perhaps maybe there is a reason. Inami palgo, maybe it's 50-50. Again, suffing the fashal hakil. Since we're unsure, again, we apply the principle of suffing the fashal hakil. Actually, the majority of the people in this group were Jews, and there was a Kanani among them. The Havile Kanani Kavua. The whole Kavua Kamaksal Maksadami. So that's the Chiddush. That even though there was majority of them were Yisraelim, so we find also this cool that we're not going to end up killing this or sentencing the person as a capital offense because we apply the din of Kol Kavua Kamaksal Maksadami. Question TB 30. Minolan min atayra the chol kavod kamaksa machsadami. So it says mamash patr hatayra. The Torah says you're pater if you're a zerk evan lechaburas b'nei adam shirov Yisraelim. Even though the majority of them are Yisraelim, the ilav the kamaksa machsadami havli mischaven Yisrael v'chayiv. So therefore, that's how we derive from the Torah the concept of kol kavod kamaksa machsadami in the case of zerk evan legoy. Okay, so now the Gemara continues and says as follows. Itmar Rav Chia Barashi Yomer Rav Halachik Rav Yosi. He says the halachas Rav Yosi Rav Chanan Bar Rav Omer Rav Haras Shah Haisa. Actually, it was a Haras Shah. What is this referring to? So Rashi says Hach Rav Yochanan ben Nuri Sarach Shah Haisa. When he talked about the Trey Ruby, this was something in which was just there. A Rosham Shart Sidi Heker Devarim Lahatir. In other words, normally you require 2 robes. However, there was a time that we were makel when it came to only having 1 robe that was sufficient. However, that was a harashah, that was a leniency for the time. However, b'derech klal, generally speaking, we're going to require 2 robes. So this is what it means. That was just a harashah haisa. So for the Gemara, Mesa Rabbi Yirmiyah Yochsin will be in and Trey Ruby. You're telling me that in general you don't need 2 robes when it comes to the dinim of Yochsin, when it comes to marrying kahuna. So Vatanan, but we learned, it says as we continue to test Vav Amud Beis, Matzah Batinik Mushlach. If let's say you find an abandoned child, this is a Mishnah Seder Taharos, and it's talking about a city where it's typically Yisraelim. There are some of the Chachavim that live there. So Imrov of the Chachavim. So the question is, what is the status of this child? So if the majority of the people in that city are of the Chachavim, then we're going to assume that this is the status of this child as well. Imrov Yisrael. If the majority of the people that live in that city are Jews, then we're going to assume that this abandoned child must be also Jewish. How about Mechsa? What if it's exactly 50-50? So we say Yisrael, we're going to say that this child is Jewish. We're going to explain exactly what does that mean. The only time we say that if you have Rov Yisrael is only lachayoso in order to be able to sustain them. Avol yuchsin lo. In other words, when it comes to based in, as Rashi says, they are mitzuva lafar naso, to support and satiate this child based on the pasuk v'chayachichimach, that if you have a Jewish person, you have to support them and have them live. So therefore, even though we only have 1 robe, that will be sufficient for the Beis Din to be required to have to sustain this child. However, when it comes to Yuchsin, no. Namely, says Rashi, the im basi asur l'koyin. Now, let's say, for example, this abandoned child is a girl, and eventually she gets older. She's not allowed to marry Koyin because there's only 1 robe. So, l'chayra, we see here quite explicitly that you need Trey robes. He says, actually, the whole notion of this is discussing if there's a pile of rocks and Shabbos, we consider this abandoned child like a yid, and therefore we have to do what we can to save them. So in this, the Gemara says, Ishtamite hadiyam Rabbi Yehuda Marav. They obviously are missing and forgetting what we said at the beginning of this daf. That this was a story where there was also travelers. In other words, you're right. You do need 2 robes. It's mashma over there. You only need 1. It's not true. The truth is, we actually do need 2 robes, and it's not just talking about the robe of the city, but also the robe of the majority of the travelers that were going to the marketplace. When he says a harash haisa, that sounds like our Mishnah is talking about 1 robe and that we're lenient under the circumstances. So mani mastiha mastiha. You're right. The one who learns that can't learn that, because if you say it's a harash, it sounds like it's a kula, which sounds like 1 robe is sufficient. However, the truth is that we're talking about you need 2 robes. But if you would say 2 robes, then you're not going to say it's a harash. Gufa, getting back to what we said before. Matzabat tinik mushlach. Let's say you found an abandoned child. So imrav of kachavim kachavim. Imrav Yisrael. Mechsa Yisrael. So amarav lo shanu. The only time we said this din that if the majority of the people are Yisrael, that we rely on that majority to support and satiate that child. When it comes to Yuchsin, it's not enough, you need 2 rows. He says, in order to be able to remove the stones on Shabbos. Did Shmuel really say that this is the din regarding Shabbos? When it comes to Pikuach Nefesh, we don't go bust a rove. Even if it's not a rove, even if it's, let's say it's 51% in the other direction, that's not enough of a reason to say, we better not be lefakech of sagal. We're not going to take any doubt in the situation. If this is a person in the Yid, we're certainly going to want to save their life. So what does it mean? Because there's a majority of Jewish people in the city, so we're going to save this child's life, even though it's on Shabbos. What's the difference? A person will have to do so even if we don't have a rove on our side. When it says, even if the majority of the people in that city are Rabbi Chachamim, even there, Eino Cain, the din is not like that. Now, they will still save the child regardless, which is, again, a fallacy that people say that, when it comes to a doctor, that they're only going to be makbid to save Jewish children, etc. We see over here that even though there's not a rove in this situation of this Tinnik Mushlach, we still find this notion that it's still necessary to be able to do whatever is necessary on Shabbos, even a Mechal Shabbos, to remove those stones in order to save that child's life. And then it says, so what does that mean? What is the halacha? It's a majority of Chachamim, it's like regarding to feeding this child non-kosher food. So even though obviously you're not supposed to feed someone non-kosher food, someone Jewish, but if the majority of the people in that city are Avik Chachavim, we could assume this child is also an Avik Chachavim, and therefore there's nothing wrong with giving and satiating this child with food, which is not kosher. What is the halach of the majority of Jews in that city? So Amar Papa, to return a lost object. So in this situation, it's necessary for you to, again, return a lost object if the majority of the people are Jewish, because of V'chayachichimach. Mechsa, Yisrael. So you said if it's 50-50, we consider this person like a Yid. So when the Zikin, when it comes to the din of damages. So what exactly does that mean? So as a review, Rashi tells us, the Gemara in Baba Kama, it says if you have a shor shel Yisrael, you have an ox of a Jew, Shenagach Asher Shel Kanani, gores on Kanani's ox, potter. So the Shor Shel Yisrael, the owner does not have to pay anything. On the other hand, the Shor Shel Kanani, Shenagach Asher Shel Yisrael, Bein Tam Bein Muad Misham Nesek Shalim. You always have to pay full damages if it's a Kanani shore that gores and damages a Yisrael shore. So there's either if a Jew's shore gores a Kanani shore, so he's potter. However, the other way around, he's chayav full damages. The only time we say Chatzi Nezek, says Rashi, Yisrael, Tam Misham Chatzi Nezek, Muad Misham Nezek Shalim. The only time we make a distinction is if it's a Yisrael to another Yisrael. So if you have an animal which is a tame, it hasn't gored yet 3 times, so we say they only pays Chatzi Nezek. However, once it's a Shor HaMuad, then he pays Nezek Shalim. So that Hakdama is important for us to understand the rest of this Mishnah, this Gemara. Hechidami. So we're saying if it's 50-50 is a Jew. So if we're saying that our ox, a Jew's ox, gored this guy's ox, so lamely, why don't we say, I see Raya d'Israel at Ushkoil. We should say to this guy, prove in fact that you're Jewish, so this way we're going to have to pay you. And since he's not able to prove, we say that I have a cheskas mammon, and therefore I'm not going to have to pay you. It was actually what happened was that his ox gored our ox. So we say palga mishalim. He only has to pay 50, which is chatzi nezek. The idach palga. How about the other half? What? Maybe he's a Kanani. No, on this who he could say I sirayah the lav Yisrael na the etin l'chayin. Prove that I'm not Jewish, and then I'll give you the other half. And you can't prove that, and therefore I'm only going to be required to give you chatzi nezek. Okay, let's look at a couple questions here. Question 5. Manis might mechiyim minakasuv the oravel of a kamalov. So we said either that's coming to tell you, it's coming to exclude if a person was chav and harg at zev harg at zeh, you intended to kill one Jew and you killed another, or the Rabbanan says it's excluding if you throw a rock into a chabura with a majority of the people of Yisrael because of the din of mechsa al mechsa. Question 6: Ir Yisraelim va'akum darim ba. You have a city where Jews and non-Jews live. Leinin ma chashvinan v'nimsa ba ki Yisrael afil b'roiv akum. When do we say that this person is like a yid, even though the majority of the people are considered, or the majority of the people are akum? So he said, that we're strict, we don't care, even if it's rov akum, the din is that we will still say that you have to save him on Shabbos. Question TA 29. Matzabot tinik im rov Yisrael L'inyan elu beis devar mavor b'gemar debarov Yisrael. So he says lachayoso and lohayshiv lo aveda. So what is this? If you find, what are the two times that we say Rov Yisrael is Yisrael, that just that enough, Rov is enough. So he said that is l'hachayoso, in order to sustain him, which is the Beis Din's responsibility. Alternatively, or in addition to that, l'hashiv lo aveda. L'hachsil lo aveda is another. Rov Yisrael my hilchos amar paba l'hachsil aveda. Hadin l'ach b'sul nises, hadin l'ach b'sul nises, hadin l'ach b'sul nises. We finished the first parak. The next Mishnah, next parak, which will just say the first words. Isha shnes armel shnes garsha. A woman who is either widowed or divorced, and she's requesting her ksuba. Hiomeris basula nenasti. She says, I was married as a basula, so I should get 200. Rather, I married a woman who was a widow, therefore I should only give 100. What is the din? See that in tomorrow's daf. Adkan.